I don't think that institutions that serve a general population that graduate less than 10% of their students should be here. Now that's a controversial statement, and somebody's going to send me a nasty gram. But trust me, and it's true. So look, man, everybody and their mom wants to hear us talk about AI and education and how it's going to transform higher education. But before we jump into that, the reality is that higher education has been under significant pressure to change for the last few decades. With all the talk about the need to move to a skills-based economy and all the talk about alternative pathways and breaking paper ceilings and all that good stuff, and then the advent of technology and now AI. So why don't you take us back to like some of the changes that you've been seeing over the last couple of decades, what kind of pressure that's put on for change no matter what happened, forget about whether AI is a part of it. And then talk a little bit about how Coursera has been preparing and transforming in order to adapt to that.
Great, well, looking forward to it. Thank you all for being here. Jim, looking forward to the conversation. Hopefully it's going to be something a little bit contentious, something that is provocative.
I'm good at that.
Yeah, good. I'm counting on that. So, educational systems, Coursera was founded in 2012 by a couple of professors, and we serve 150 million or so people around the world. We also work with businesses to do upskilling. We work with governments to do, workforce development, public sector upskilling, and then we work with, we have something called Coursera for Campus, where we work with universities who put courses into their curriculum and offer it to their students. And I think that at a really high level, one of the things I like to think about as a CEO is just businesses need to change at a pace that's consistent with how quickly technology and society is changing. And as things change faster, the demand for agility goes up. And that means people need to be learning things. I mean, I'd say 20 years ago, I got my college degree in 1991, so that was more than 20 years ago. Things were moving fairly quickly, but as society changes faster and the way that companies attract customers and serve customers and create new products, as that moves faster, the need for learning new things increases, and the need for educational systems to keep pace with change has increased. So to some degree, it's been the same challenge for quite some time in terms of pace of change. It's just that the change is going a lot faster. At COVID, there was a big shock. And just as things start feeling a little bit normal, generative AI comes along and is likely going to change virtually every job. Some more than others, but it's going to have a big impact. And higher education systems, any education systems, but especially for adult learning, they need to figure out, how do they adapt more quickly. We serve universities and colleges around the world. Turns out India and Southeast Asia is moving pretty fast, especially the private universities. And in Latin America, they're adopting a lot of these industry micro-credentials pretty quickly. Europe is the slowest in the world. The US, not super fast. And a lot of it is when you have established policies, practices, and payment systems, it's hard to change those things. And a lot of those things are set up for a pace of change which was much slower than now. So we're doing a lot of innovative things. It's good to have innovative partners, but a lot of it really is about keeping pace. And then I'm sure we'll also talk with respect to AI and other things about sort of equity, return on investment, looking at society and saying, to what degree are these institutions building a better society, a more, not just economically competitive society, but a more fair society as well.
So, really appreciate you laying it out like that. Let me just push on a couple of different things. One, basically we described it as, hey, these institutions, the laws, and then all the people who have invested interest kind of hold things in the status quo. That kind of sets you up for the Clayton Christensen disruptive innovation kind of approach to things, which might push you to outside the country, but are there things that you're thinking about inside the country to allow you to innovate more quickly? Yeah,
I do think it matters a lot, like skills-based hiring, just as a principle, as a policy, even if the practice might be a little bit harder. It's like, look, we see that so many positions have a concentrated type of person in that position. It's like, why does that happen? A lot of it is the prerequisite to get into the position have requirements that are not equally shared by people. And so if those requirements are absolutely necessary, maybe keep them. But if they're not, then that's a real sort of unnecessary discriminator as to who gets into the job. So the idea that, look, certain jobs don't require college degrees. They don't. There's a lot of people in those jobs that perform well, they don't have a college degree. As a policy saying skills-based hiring, get rid of the paper ceiling. What's tough is the practice, because hiring managers ultimately still make a decision as to who they hire. And so the policy might say, we don't require a college degree. Ultimately, the hiring manager is going to decide who gets hired, and what we see is the practice lags the policy a bit. I do think there's some really innovative things, though. I mean, seeing it from the hiring manager's point of view, they want to make sure they have someone who can get the job done. Sure. I'm like, it's pretty easy, maybe even a little lazy and probably a bit false to say, well, if you have a college degree, you probably have a good chance of doing it. But absent a college degree, there's like, well, and absent work experience, like, how do you know? So I think industry micro-credentials are a trend that is highly complementary to skills-based hiring, which is maybe it's not a 4-year degree that's required. Maybe it's something that's much shorter. It's a little bit more specific to the job, is more affordable, and is more accessible to more people. And so we see as an innovation a policy of skills-first hiring, which is excellent, and then these industry micro-credentials that can allow someone to get skilled up in a job without necessarily getting a college degree, but be able to have a credential and have skills and a portfolio of projects where they can show an employer, I'm qualified for this job.
Got it. But let me get extra nerdy with you for a second.
Yeah.
So if we want to go to that level, then you say, okay, well, I need to have a taxonomy that people agree upon. Mm-hmm. I need to have ways to validate those skills against that taxonomy. I need to have a way for people to actually then accept those kinds of validated skills into their systems, where most of the hiring, at least for the big companies, happens by algorithms first before you even get a chance to take a look. Mm. So when you think about the missing pieces to, don't forget about the learner profile to hold the credentials to tell people that you have these skills, right? Yeah. One last thing. So there's the technical competencies piece, right? But what we're finding, and I think a lot of the boot camps found, and other folks like that, is that it's great that you got the technical competencies, but there are these other skills, right? Whether you want to call them the 21st century skills or old school soft skills or whatever they might be. And like, what about the ability to validate those and let people know that you've got that kind of skills that come along that are even harder to teach in different contexts. Yeah. So when you think about the missing infrastructure and the missing pieces for this to actually work at scale, what does that make you think about, and how do you think about addressing it?
Yeah, so a lot of this is about sort of quality and effectiveness signals. You could have data that maybe proves it through a third party. That takes a long time. Sometimes a little bit of a jump and a little bit of a leap of faith is to go with brands and standards. And so one of the things that we have really tried to do is, of course, create high quality stuff, but also make sure it's coming from institutions who put their brand on it. And it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be high quality or fit for purpose, but it certainly is much more likely that if you have, Google professionals who are IT professionals teaching a course that's branded with Google, saying, let me tell you how I do my job at Google as an IT manager, that has a lot of credibility. And then in terms of the educational piece, so there's we work with Microsoft, Amazon, Google, et cetera. We pick a job role that's in high demand. We talk to hiring managers. We come up with all the jobs to be done and the skills required. So we kind of spec that out from the employer. We have a practitioner in industry, a well-known company, sort of build the thing with us. We help with the pedagogy. But then as another type of standards, we go to the American Council on Education, and we ask them to basically hire faculty, which is what they do, to do the ACE credit recommendation.
Sure.
So you kind of got the industry brand with the real practitioners to at least convey a sense of quality and appropriateness. Then on the ACE side, you have that association, and you have the faculty sort of review, and then the credit recommendation, and then you bring it to a community college or a university. And you say, look, and we are very clear to call these career electives. These are not replacing the core curriculum. This is not replacing any incumbent professor or course. It's these are just courses from industry, taught by the best brands with expert instructors, reviewed by ACE, by real faculty. It is ACE recommended. It comes from Microsoft.
Yep.
It is a job in high demand that would be a nice small supplement to your curriculum.
Okay, so we got to digital and we got to small, but doesn't that mean you just have like another ceiling that's digital and a lot of small pieces that you have to get through that are tied to people's brands, as opposed to actually I can demonstrate that I can do this in any kind of context, in a specific context, and then because I can do it, I should be able to get the job?
Ideally, yeah. I mean, part of it is like trying to bring the barriers down as low as possible. Okay. I mean, online really helps.
Yep.
The fact that anywhere, anyone, anytime.
Yep.
The AI, and we'll probably get there a little bit more, but like translation, so language becomes less of a barrier, access becomes a little bit less of a barrier. If there were a world, and maybe there will increasingly become a world where you could directly observe skills during an interview process, yep. I think that could help a lot. But generally, almost as an ethical matter, I would submit you have to have humans in the loop when you're interviewing somebody, at least making a hiring decision, mm-hmm. because if algorithms bias who gets interviewed or who gets hired because of the training data, that clearly would be a pretty high stakes decision in terms of like who gets an interview, who gets a job. And having humans interview is a costly thing. So I think that companies will always try to figure out an efficient way to try to get attractive candidates. I think credentials will be important. It is useful though when you put these credentials into a university program, whether that's an AA program, associate's program, or a 4-year program. You could help people get a smaller credential, a bigger credential, or a smaller one, go to the workplace, and over time, if you want, take your credits and finish your degree online, if you want to.
Awesome. And I promise to let you ask one question before it's over.
Yeah.
So this may be a good pivot to the conversation about AI. So one of the things that would be required to enable a world like that is very different kind of assessment than we have today.
Yes, yeah.
So are you all doing anything unique or partnering with anybody who you think is thinking differently about assessment that could enable some of the stuff that we're talking about? And is AI changing the way we ought to be thinking about assessment and what's possible?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of amazing. It was the case, I think, that when students would write something and submit a written piece, the only question was, did they really write it? Did they copy it from somebody else? But everyone knew that a human brain basically created it, because computers can't create, written pieces. And that's not true anymore. I mean, that's not true. So this whole question of how do you authentically verify what somebody has knows and whether they really did the work is tricky. And we've been doing some really fun things, just to give you a little taste of what's out there now on Coursera. One thing that's obvious is kind of machine grading, multiple choice, true, false, et cetera. That stuff is generally pretty easy to cheat. We now have the ability pretty easily to generate custom multiple choice questions and true, false questions based on the learning objectives and the content. So the ability to generate high quality questions that are machine gradable has definitely advanced. On Coursera, before generative AI, if we wanted to have someone reflect on something and have that graded with feedback, we'd do peer review, because you had to have a human brain, read through a rubric and get the feedback. One of the neat things is that the instructions for the peer reviews are written by faculty, whoever built the course. There's a rubric to score it, because the peers needed some kind of a rubric to score it. And then there's a whole scoring mechanism, and then a place where you could type in your feedback. And humans would do this. Well, we have this little tutor called Coach, and turns out that the generative AI is pretty good. When it knows the learning objectives, and it knows the course, and it knows the instructions, and it reads the submission, it knows the rubric, reads the rubric, it can do a pretty good job of saying, here's a rubric, is that true? Here's a rubric, is that true? And then at the end of it saying, if this is what you were looking for and that's what you read, give a little bit of feedback as to how well it matched. So AI-based peer review has been really, the vast majority of learners, when they could choose either to have AI or a peer do it, they would choose the AI, because it's fast and it's generally higher quality. But the thing we just launched, which I'm excited about, is something that after you submit say an essay, Coach pops up and starts interviewing you about your submission. It's not using AI to detect if it was written for AI by AI. It's using AI to talk to you about what you wrote. It says so. It's a little bit like defending your dissertation. So it's like, hey, I see, because it knows, again, it knows the course, it knows the learning objectives, it knows the thing, it read your submission, it knows the rubric, and it says, hey, I noticed that your thesis, you said blah, blah, blah. How'd you come up with that? What other ideas were you thinking about? And then depending on how you answer, it'll say, that's good, but now in the third paragraph you said this, and you kind of cite this. Like, what was your source there, and how did you make sure that that was credible? So it actually has a set of objectives of what it's trying to assess in this interview process, and then that gets routed to the instructor with a little score that says, here's how likely we think it is that that person really wrote it. But it's about evaluating your thinking process, not just the words that you submitted.
Really interesting, really interesting. So two things that reminds me of. One is, way back when, there was this thing called the Center for Academic Advancement that did all the course redesign work. And the course redesign work was, the big challenge to folks was to be able to produce the same kinds of outcomes for half the cost. And when people did the redesign work, they basically, the ones that produced a standard deviation or more had some of the same traits. It was basically what looks like a flipped classroom, so videos for the students can interact with before, but actually an assignment that happened before where the scores actually then went back to the faculty member, so they used a live class time in the classroom to actually then tailor what they did with the students, and potentially even group students differently based on the data. So it sounds like some of the best of course redesign work that we know of from that body of research has been translated into what an AI can help you do that it's really hard for a faculty member to do on their own. And because we're using online medium, it's already built in. So all that to say, well, it sounds like in the end, you're saying that the AI now can do the kind of inquiry that most people never get from their faculty.
Totally.
And that they can do this anytime, anywhere. They can do it in any language. They can do it at a fraction of the marginal cost, at like zero marginal cost. Zero marginal cost. So why do we need colleges again?
Sorry?
Why do we need colleges again?
Oh, well, so I think that there is something about structure. I mean, think about like fitness programs. Like, what does it take to do something that takes a lot of effort? You know it's good for you, but it takes a lot of effort. Usually it takes some commitment, some desire to do it. It takes time, it takes energy. Often it takes some structure, like there's some program, because people don't always know exactly the best way to go about it. Sometimes it takes encouragement. And there's also something in many cases about having a community that you do it with and somebody that you're accountable to. So the number of people, if they can afford to hire a personal trainer, will be like, oh, I need someone to help me feel a little bit more accountable. So I do think that there are quality standards that are very valuable to uphold. There's a lot of abuses that happen around the world with distance learning and things like that. So quality assurance, I think, is really important. It can often slow things down, so that's tough. But I think creating learning experiences with other people. You can do a lot of it online, but there's something about having a human instructor, having real colleagues, that even if you do it online, having a school to facilitate it is valuable. I think that schools will adapt fast enough in order to still provide that kind of community experience and that quality standard that's going to make it worthwhile. Hey, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You clearly know a lot about education policy. When you see how the world's changing and we talk about how structures need to adapt and which ones are hardest, like where do you see the biggest obstacles, policies that need to change faster than they're changing today to enable more innovation?
Sure. So what's interesting is I think that one of the first places that I would look is not to higher education, but to employers. Think about how many people start college and don't finish. They wind up in jobs where they're holding student debt. They're in a job where they're underemployed relative to the skills that they demonstrated. But an employer in general has almost zero incentive with the way that our human resource systems work to try and actually build the capacity of that employee, even if they're a fantastic employee. When I was deputy secretary, I ran this exercise around open courseware, trying to get companies to take the things that were non-proprietary and make them open, right? And I was like, it is completely in your interest to take a fantastic $12 an hour employee at that time and turn them into a $75 employee, because it is hardest to assess whether somebody's going to be a great employee. But if they can actually do the technical skills and they're a great employee and they're incredibly grateful to you, like, what is that person worth to you? Like, priceless, right? But we don't give employers any incentive to actually invest in their own people. We don't actually reward them for that as a benefit, if you will. We don't reward them for having pathways to demonstrate that they're actually a really good company for providing economic mobility for their folks. So there was an interesting experiment done by the Burning Glass Institute where they did this American Opportunity Index, where they looked at the top 250 employers and could tell whether they were great at creating career ladders within, whether they were a great first-time company, et cetera, et cetera. We need to actually figure out how you create that kind of transparency at scale, and also to reward folks with tax incentives and other things that allow them, that encourage them to be investing in their folks to create mobility.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is that we can keep running away from the real question. So we did a fantastic job as a country at creating an access system like no other in the world. That's why everybody copied us. And the policy drove that. We just missed one really important thing: completion and placement.
Yeah.
And so we keep running away from an accountability system that says, look, there's lots and lots of reasons that people do want to go to college. But in the end, if you spend all that money and you don't finish, you wind up with debt, and you can't get a job that gives you a path to mobility or even thriving, then something went wrong.
Oh, and sometimes you're out of the workforce while you're doing that, so you're forfeiting your income right there too.
For sure, especially when you are a quote-unquote non-traditional student, especially when you're working and trying to get to the next level, where we know with the half-life of jobs getting shorter, you have to make that transition. So the accountability system, which is not my go-to play, but the accountability system has to have a minimum transparency about which institutions are actually producing the kind of outcomes that are worth it for people to invest in. And if not, people get really worried about the institutions that, I don't think that institutions that serve a general population that graduate less than 10% of their students
should exist.
Should be here. Now that's a controversial statement. And somebody's going to send me a nasty gram. Trust me. And it's true. And so I think transparency first, accountability second, tied to the things that allow us to say, are you actually serving the folks who need it most? And are you serving them well? The last thing I would say is that we have to actually subsidize the transition of the sector. So higher education is a public good, and it is also an industry. And what is happening is there is an industry transformation happening with all the factors that we just talked about. That means that colleges are going to close, colleges are going to open, and students need to know that they are going to be protected in this context. People who are in the system need to have a mechanism for being able, just like we try and take care of people when they leave any company that just shut down, have a way to get transition to something better. And right now we don't actually think about that. And we even let colleges shut down like it happens in the for-profit world, and sometimes that may be what's necessary. But you never want to have a circumstance where a school shuts down and the students are the ones left handing holding the bag. So we need an infrastructure that allows us to look at the fact that the way that college is happening, the way higher education is happening, is changing. It's changing very rapidly. It's going to change even more rapidly. It's going to be a great thing for students in the long run because it should make it more accessible and more affordable. But that transition time is going to be really hard. And we have to protect communities and we have to protect people.
Love it, love it. Are we okay on time? Or
I think we're supposed to end because you were like, no. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks, man.